The night my son texted me our code word, I was sitting in my recliner with a cup of tea gone cold, half watching the news and thinking about nothing in particular. Just another Thursday. The kind of quiet evening you don't appreciate until everything shifts. My phone buzzed on the armrest. I picked it up expecting spam or maybe a weather alert. We'd had freezing rain warnings all week across the Ottawa Valley, but it was my son, Marcus. One word. Just one. Maple. I set down my cup very carefully. My hands were steady. That surprised me, honestly, because my heart had already moved into a different gear. Maple was our word. We'd chosen it years ago, back when Marcus first married Serena Holloway. And I started noticing things I didn't like. Things I told myself weren't my business. Things I pushed to the back of my mind the way you do when you want to keep the peace and not be that father-in-law. You know the kind, the difficult one, the one who causes problems at Christmas. I didn't want to be him, so I kept quiet. And I hated myself a little for it. But I was smart enough, or maybe just old enough, to know that keeping quiet and being unprepared are two different things. So one evening about 2 years before that Thursday, I sat down with Marcus at my kitchen table, just the two of us, coffee between us, late October light coming through the window, and I said to him quietly, if you ever need me, if things ever get to a point where you need me there fast and you can't say it out loud, you send me that word, just that word, and I'll come. He'd looked at me for a long moment. 29 years old, my son. Broad shoulders like his grandfather, eyes like his mother, God rest her. He didn't ask why I thought we'd need a code word. He already knew. He just nodded and said, okay, Dad, and then we never spoke of it again. Until that Thursday night in February when the temperature outside was -18 and the word maple appeared on my screen at 11:47 p.m. I was already putting on my boots before I'd fully made the decision to go. I should back up. Because to understand that night, you have to understand how this all started. And how something that looked like a good marriage from the outside can hollow itself out so completely that you can walk through the walls. Marcus called me from Halifax the day he met Serena Holloway. He was out there for work. He's a structural engineer, does inspection work on bridges and overpasses, which means he travels a fair bit and always has. He called me on a Sunday evening, and I could hear it in his voice before he said a word. That particular lightness. His mother used to call it his spark voice. She said she could tell when he was genuinely happy because his voice went up about half a tone without him knowing it. I met someone, Dad, he said. I gathered, I said. He laughed. Am I that obvious? You've been obvious since you were 9 and tried to hide the broken window from me. You're not built for concealment, son. Serena Holloway was, as far as I could tell in those early days, a perfectly fine woman. She was from Oakville, Ontario, worked in financial compliance at a firm downtown. Sharp as a tack, well-dressed, knew exactly what to say and when to say it. She had this way of entering a room and immediately understanding who the most important person in it was and positioning herself accordingly. I noticed that about her early on. I noticed it and I filed it away and I told myself it was just ambition, and there was nothing wrong with ambition. She was polite to me. Always polite, remembered my birthday. Brought a very good bottle of Niagara Pinot Noir the first time she came to my house for dinner. Said all the right things about the roast I'd made and asked about my years working for the Crown Corporation before I retired. Perfect manners. The kind that feels slightly rehearsed, but you can't quite prove it. Marcus was happy. That was what I held on to. They got married in September 3 years after they met. Ceremony out near Gatineau, beautiful fall colors, about 80 guests. I gave a speech that made Marcus cry and Serena smile in a way that didn't quite reach her eyes. I noticed that too. I kept noticing things and kept telling myself I was a suspicious old man projecting, that I just missed having my son to myself, that this was the normal jealousy fathers feel and I needed to get over it. I retired from the Department of Transport 2 years before the wedding. 41 years of service. I wasn't lost without it the way some men are. I had my woodworking, I had my small plot of garden out back, I had my Thursday curling league down at the Carlton Heights Club. I had the 3-bedroom house in Nepean that Margaret and I had bought in 1987 and paid off together before she got sick. My life was not empty. I want to be clear about that. But Marcus was all I had left of her. And watching him disappear slowly into a marriage that I couldn't quite see through, that was its own kind of grief. The first time I said something, we were about 18 months into the marriage. Marcus had been quieter than usual on our Sunday calls, giving shorter answers, laughing less. I asked him once if everything was all right and he said yes, of course. Just busy with the Champlain Approach project, lots of overtime, I let it go. But then he canceled Christmas. Not Christmas dinner, just Christmas. He called me on the 23rd of December and said Serena had made plans to be in Oakville with her family, and they'd both agreed it made more sense to spend the holidays there this year. We'll do something in January, Dad, he said. Maybe I'll drive up for a weekend. We didn't do something in January. I spent Christmas Day alone for the first time in my life. I cooked a small chicken. I watched a documentary about the Franklin expedition. I called my brother Lawrence out in Kelowna and pretended I was fine. In February, I drove to their townhouse in the Glebe unannounced. I know how that sounds. I'm not proud of it, but I needed to see my son with my own eyes. Serena answered the door. The look on her face when she saw me lasted less than a second before she replaced it with something warm and welcoming. But I saw it. In my 63 years of being alive and paying attention to people, I have gotten very good at reading the first unguarded half-second of a person's face. What I saw was annoyance. Cold, controlled annoyance. "Patrick," she said, using my name the way people use a tool they'd rather put down. "What a surprise." "Marcus didn't mention you were coming." "Marcus didn't know," I said. "I was in the area, thought I'd stop by." "I was not in the area. I lived 40 minutes away. She let me in, made tea, was perfectly pleasant the entire time." Marcus came down from upstairs in his face when he saw me. That was the thing. For just a moment, before he got himself under control, he looked relieved. Like a man who'd been holding something heavy for a long time and had just been offered somewhere to set it down. We talked for about an hour. Normal conversation. Serena was present for all of it. When I stood to leave, I hugged Marcus at the door and said quietly, close to his ear, "I'm here, you know I'm here." He nodded. He didn't say anything, but he held on a beat longer than usual. That was when I first thought about the code word. The 2 years between that February visit and the Thursday night everything changed were not quiet years. Exactly. They were the kind of years where you watch something slow happen and can't stop it. Like watching a crack move through concrete, it goes its own pace, doesn't care what you think, just keeps going. Marcus's Sunday calls got shorter. Then they moved to every other Sunday. Then sometimes he did miss one and text the next day saying, sorry, they'd had people over, lost track of time. I stopped asking questions because every time I asked questions, his answers had a particular careful quality that told me he was monitoring what he said. That he wasn't free to just talk. I ran into our neighbor Pam at the Billings Bridge Mall in March. She and her husband Arthur had lived 4 houses down from us when Marcus was growing up, practically family. She'd seen Marcus and Serena at a restaurant in the market a few weeks before. He looks thin, she said to me, touching my arm. Is he all right? He looked tired, Patrick. Pam wasn't a worrier. She wasn't the kind of woman who said things to be dramatic. I thanked her and drove home and sat in Margaret's chair in the living room for a while, looking at the photographs on the shelf. The photographs. Marcus at 7, gap-toothed and proud, holding up a perch he'd caught at Rideau Lake. Marcus at 16 in his hockey gear. Marcus and me at his convocation, both of us squinting into the sun, his arm around my shoulders, and one of him and Serena at the wedding, professional photo, perfectly composed. I'd always thought it was a beautiful photo. Sitting there that March evening, I found myself looking at it differently. At the way she was angled very slightly toward the camera rather than toward my son. I took the photo off the shelf and put it in a drawer. I'm not sure why. It just didn't belong out there anymore. The money troubles started, as far as I could trace them, in the spring of their 2nd year. Marcus mentioned offhandedly, the way people mention things they're trying not to make a big deal of, that they were refinancing the house. Interest rate thing, he said. Just made sense to lock in now. I asked a few questions and his answers were vague in a way that Marcus's answers normally weren't. He was meticulous about finances, my son. Got that from his mother. The vagueness worried me. I called my brother Lawrence again, and I told him what I'd been noticing over the past year. Lawrence is 11 years older than me, 74 now, and he is the person in my life I trust most with the things I can't quite say out loud yet. He listened the whole way through without interrupting, which is one of the things I love about him. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Pat, you know what you know. I know, I said. The question is what you're going to do about it. I don't know what I can do. He's a grown man, he's your son, Lawrence said. You can be ready. That conversation was the one that finally made me pick up the phone and call Marcus and ask him to drive up for the day. Just the 2 of us. I made his favorite. Beef stew with the dumplings Margaret used to make. Her recipe, the one I'd finally gotten right after a year of failed attempts. We sat at the kitchen table after dinner, with the same kind of late-season light coming through the window, and I told him straight. I think something's wrong, I said. I'm not going to push you or ask you to tell me things you're not ready to say. But I need you to know I'm paying attention. And I need us to have a way for you to reach me if things get to a point where you need help and can't ask for it directly. Marcus looked at his hands for a long time. Serena thinks I'm too dependent on you, he said finally. His voice was careful. She thinks it's not healthy. That I should be building our life, not leaning on family so much. And what do you think? He didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. You don't have to use it, I said. Maybe you'll never need it, but it'll be there. And that was how we picked maple. Simple, Canadian. Something no one would look twice at if they saw it on a phone screen. Just a word about a tree. When I got to their townhouse that Thursday night, it was 12:24 in the morning. The temperature had dropped further and there was frost on the windshield of Serena's Audi in the driveway. I parked on the street and sat for a moment with the engine off, listening to the tick of the cooling metal. Then I got out. The lights were on downstairs. I could see movement through the curtains. I rang the bell. There was a pause. Then the door opened and it was Serena. She was in a silk robe, perfectly put together in the way she always was, and her face when she saw me cycled through 3 or 4 things very quickly. Surprise, calculation, something cold, before she settled into confused politeness. "Patrick, it's almost midnight. What are you?" "I'd like to see Marcus," I said. "He's asleep." "I don't think he is," I said. "I'd like to see my son." She held the door half-closed, shoulder against the frame. "You can't just show up here in the middle of the night. Do you know how inappropriate?" "Serena," I kept my voice level. 63 years has a way of teaching you that the quieter you speak in moments like this, the more clearly you're heard. "I'm not leaving. You can let me in, or I can stand here on the porch in -18 until Marcus comes to the door himself. I'll wait. I've got good boots." Something shifted in her face then. I'd seen it in people before, the moment when they realize the wall they've built doesn't extend as far as they thought. She stepped back. Marcus was in the kitchen. He was sitting at the table with a cup of something, still dressed. And when I walked through from the hallway, he stood up so fast the chair scraped back across the tile. In the years since he'd grown his beard, he looked more like Margaret's father than like either of us. That night his eyes were red around the edges. Not from crying, I thought. From the particular exhaustion of someone who hasn't been sleeping. "Dad," he said, his voice cracked on just that one word. I crossed the kitchen and I put my arms around my son and held on. He was shaking slightly. The kind of shaking that happens when someone has been holding themselves together for a very long time and something has finally given way. "I've got you," I said. "I'm here." We stayed like that for a while. Serena didn't come into the kitchen. When he'd steadied himself, I sat down across from him and I said, "Tell me." He told me. It had been building for years, just as I'd suspected. Not violence. I want to be clear about that. Because what happened in that house was its own kind of damage and I don't want to minimize it by comparison. What Serena had done was quieter than violence, more patient. She had spent 3 years systematically dismantling my son's sense of his own judgment. His money, they had a joint account, which is normal, fine, sensible. What was not normal was that Serena had, over time, positioned herself as the sole manager of their finances in a way that left Marcus without a clear picture of what was happening. When he asked questions, she had answers that made him feel foolish for asking. When he wanted to set aside savings for his own discretionary spending, not extravagant, Marcus is not an extravagant man. He wanted to be able to take a weekend fishing up near Pembroke without having to justify it. She managed to make him feel guilty about it. Selfish. Like he was threatening their financial stability. She'd also gradually made his friendships difficult. Not dramatically, just subtle frictions. His friend from university, Trevor, who came to town twice a year, and they'd always gone out for wings and watched the Senators game. Serena had, over the course of about 2 years, made those evenings complicated enough that Marcus had eventually stopped trying. It was never one big fight. It was 100 small inconveniences. The wrong weekend. She had plans. She'd already told her parents they were free that evening. He should have said something earlier. And she had reframed our relationship, his and mine, until he'd started to believe what she told him. That I was overbearing. That his attachment to me was stunted, childish. That a real grown man with a real marriage didn't need to call his father every Sunday. I thought of all those shorter phone calls, the careful answers, and I had to work very hard not to let what I was feeling show on my face. "I know how it sounds," Marcus said. He was looking at the table. "I know when I say it out loud it sounds like, why didn't you just leave? Why didn't you just push back? But it happens so gradually. You wake up one day and you don't quite recognize yourself and you're not even sure when you stopped." "I know," I said. "I believe you." He looked up. "Tonight," I said. "Tell me what happened tonight." Tonight had started as an argument about money. Marcus had received a message from his bank, a notification about an automatic transfer he hadn't authorized. A significant amount moved to an account he didn't recognize. He'd asked Serena about it. The conversation had escalated. And Serena, who normally kept herself controlled in arguments with Marcus, had said something that crossed a line. Something about his mother. He didn't repeat it word for word and I didn't ask him to. "She went upstairs," he said. "And I just sat here. And I thought, I can't do this anymore. I can't." And I thought about that word. And I picked up my phone. I reached across the table and put my hand over his. Neither of us said anything for a moment. I need you to listen to me now, I said, because this is the important part. You didn't fail at this marriage. You were in a situation that was designed to make you feel like you were failing. There is a difference, and I need you to hold on to that. He nodded. I wasn't sure he fully believed me yet. That was all right, he had time to believe me. What mattered right now was the next few hours. I'm not going anywhere tonight, I said. I'm going to make us both a proper cup of tea, and you're going to tell me everything I need to know. About the account, about what's been moved, about all of it, and tomorrow morning we're going to call a lawyer. He let out a breath that had probably been held for months. There's a woman in Centertown, I said. Sandra Beaumont. She was recommended to me by a colleague from the department years ago when I thought we might need her for something else. Didn't end up needing her then. I kept her number. I pulled out my phone and showed him the contact I'd added 3 months earlier, after a Sunday call that had disturbed me enough that I'd come home and done some research. Preparation. Not pessimism, just preparation. Marcus stared at the phone. You kept her number, he said. For months, I kept her number, I confirmed, because you are my son and I pay attention. I won't pretend the next few months were easy. Easy is not the word for any part of it. Sandra Beaumont was, as advertised, exceptional. She had the kind of quiet ferocity that I recognized because Margaret had had it. The ability to be absolutely relentless without ever raising her voice. She met with Marcus and reviewed what he was able to document about the financial situation. The unauthorized transfer turned out to be one of 4 that Marcus hadn't been aware of over the previous 14 months. All to the same external account that, after some investigation, turned out to be accessible only by Serena. The amounts were significant. Not ruinous, but significant. Enough to matter in court, which is where this was headed. Serena Holloway retained her own lawyer, a very expensive one from a firm on Bay Street. And the process was exactly as drawn out and unpleasant as these things always are. I will not go into every detail of it because most of it is not my story to tell. It is Marcus's, and he will tell it when and how and to whom he chooses. What I will tell you is this. On the day the settlement was finalized, Marcus drove up to Nepean and we had dinner at my kitchen table. Beef stew again, the dumplings, Margaret's recipe. He looked like himself for the first time in years. There was color in his face. He'd been sleeping. He'd had a weekend the month before up near Pembroke with Trevor, the 2 of them fishing, just like old times. After dinner we sat in the living room with the good scotch I'd been saving. The photographs were back on the shelf, most of them. The wedding photo was not. I want to apologize to you, Marcus said. I looked at him. For what? For all of it. For letting things get to the point where I couldn't just pick up the phone and call you. For the Christmases. For Marcus. I set down my glass. You don't apologize for something that was done to you. That's not how this works. He was quiet. The only person who owes an apology in this story is Serena Holloway, I said. And I suspect she's not the type to give one. So let's leave her out of our living room, shall we? He almost smiled. Almost. Yeah, he said. Okay. What I want from you, I said, is for you to build something good, whatever that looks like, on your own terms. And I want you to come up here for Christmas this year. Proper Christmas. I'll get a tree. We can watch the Senators lose. He did smile at that, a real one. They've had a decent start this season. They always have a decent start. We laughed. It had been a while since we'd laughed together in that house, and the sound of it felt important. Like something being restored. Later, after he'd driven home, I sat in Margaret's chair in the quiet of the house, and I thought about all of it. About how long I'd watched and waited and tried to be careful and not overreach. About the code word and the frozen February night, and the look on my son's face when I walked into his kitchen. About how little time it had actually taken, in the end, for him to reach out, once he let himself. People underestimate what it means to just be ready, to not need convincing in the moment, to already have your boots by the door and a lawyer's number in your phone, and a clear enough head to know that the quiet voice is more powerful than the loud one. My son didn't need me to be a hero that night. He needed me to show up, to not make him explain himself from the beginning, to already know as much as I could know what he was carrying, so that when he finally put it down there was somewhere for it to land. That's the job, I think. That's what it comes down to. You stay present even when they push you away. You stay ready even when you hope you'll never be needed. And when the word comes, whatever word you've chosen between you, you put on your boots and you go. Margaret would have done the same and faster. She always was quicker to move than me. I like to think I got there in time. I like to think she'd agree.